Chairman, one of the things though that I see is you have this apps machine that you hold, and it's an Apple invention, but it's made somewhere else out of this country. And how do you get that back in the country? But I live in a world that's different from most of the people in this RNC, and it's like we don't exist. I mean, everybody's talking about Hispanics, but African Americans built this country and continue to be ignored by everybody. And since we are no longer the largest minority, we get pushed to the bottom. But I was watching the Egyptian revolution, and I've watched what happened in Iran. And everywhere I see America's future, because those are young men who can't find jobs, who are ignorant, etc. And I see the same thing in the United States with blacks, Hispanics, poor white kids. And the question is, how do we capture the job market? Because the things you're talking about are high-tech jobs. And I know that high-tech doesn't create a whole lot of jobs for John Q. Public. These young folks have to have something to do. And we as a party keep saying the government doesn't create jobs. Well, it doesn't, but who is? And the last point I want to make is everybody keeps talking about health care. Well, I want to talk to you about my book called Conservative Prescriptions, Common Sense Conservative Prescriptions, because I talk in there only about solutions, and they're solutions based on people that aren't traditionally included, such as single mothers, who are the largest voting bloc that we continue to ignore. Talk about young people who are disenfranchised, and talk about health care in a different way. You want the high tech. But if you remember, there are 3,145 health departments in this country. If that were the entry point to health care, it would solve most of the problems at a cheaper level than we do. So my question is, whose solutions do you want? Do you want solutions from people who stand to make the money off it? Or are you really listening to the people who are being pushed down, who are being disenfranchised, who don't have a pot to whatever in and a window to throw it out of? Because I don't hear their voices resonating, not in this party, but I don't hear them in the Democratic Party either. I hear the Democrats saying to us, let us lead you to stay where you are. What we have to offer them is some hope to be better than they are.
Okay, Speaker.
No. First of all, I really like your closing lines, and I think you've captured the rhythm of what we're trying to say, and I think it does have to be applied at every level. One of the points I'd make is I don't have all the answers. I don't think anybody has all the answers. I think our job is to enlist 311 million people in developing the answers, and many of those answers are going to be very local, and they're going to be involving how do we liberate people. So I'll give you two or three quick examples you mentioned. I think the Small Business Committee in the House, which we control, you don't have the same ability in the Senate, I think they ought to do a series of hearings and allow as many small businessmen and women as possible to come in and describe everything they have to do that is stupid, that is required by government. And I think we ought to have a Small Business Liberation Act that just cuts through like 70%. If the regulation doesn't relate to health or to something vital, we ought to eliminate it in block. And and the reason is very simple. It goes back to your point. The largest creator of jobs is small business. We have made it harder and harder, and this has been under both Democrats and Republicans. We've added layer after layer after layer of paperwork. We have more and more government interference. You just had and I didn't see anybody blow up over this. You just had the IRS send out thousands of letters to small businesses challenging them to defend their reporting with no evidence. And the IRS had no proof that any of these businesses did anything wrong. And you go back out to those businesses and say, how much is it going to cost you to respond to this letter from the IRS, which is a fishing expedition to try to get more revenue? Now, they didn't send that letter to any of the big banks in New York. They didn't send that letter to any of the top 100 corporations, because those places are big enough. They have full-time law staffs to do nothing except play games. But if you're a small business and you get a letter from the United States government that says, submit all this or else, so I would just suggest to you, that we ought to be in the business of liberating every African American, every Asian American, every Latino American small business man or woman, and finding out what would enable them to hire. If you went through the small business communities in your state and said, what would enable you to hire 3 more people? What do we have to get rid of in terms of government cost for you to hire 3 more people? Times every small business in your state, and all of a sudden you're having a conversation with a local Korean business person or a local African American businesswoman, and they're now having you listen to them, tell you about their life, their problems, their concerns. The other area where Jack Kemp was a pioneer that I wish we'd go back and pick up, frankly, is public housing. We had this great debate. I was part of this. Jack had this idea that we ought to create sweat equity, and it started with the old principle that nobody ever washes a rental car. So we've created all this public housing that is impersonal. The people who live in it don't own it. They're not responsible for it. They have no involvement. And Jack wanted to allow them to earn sweat equity to ultimately actually have the right to own their housing if they took care of it and did the right things and what have you. And we had this great debate, and Barney Frank gets up. This is about 1987. And Frank gets up and he says, do you realize in New York City, if we allowed the poor to actually earn their apartment, that those apartments could sell for $1 million or more dollars? And they wouldn't be poor anymore. And that's wrong. And he said, and then what would happen to the people who don't currently have an apartment because we now sold the apartment? And I thought, you know, if we could enable every person in public housing in New York to make $1 million, it would probably be okay. And after they paid taxes on the $1 million, they'd probably all become Republican. I mean, but I'm just trying to give you a flavor. I don't have answers for some of these things, but we don't, as you said, and you're exactly right, we don't even go into the neighborhoods. Now, I want to say Reince has done the best job of any chairman I have ever seen at reaching out.
Thank you.
And if he can drive this into the states, if those of you who are chairman and executive directors can pick up the rhythm of what he's trying to do in reaching out to every American of every background, we will be in dramatically better shape by the fall of 2014. Because, as Kemp used to say, they have to know that you care before they care that you know. And I think it's really, what you've done there is really important.
Thank you. All right, 1 or 2 more. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm John Paget from the state of Georgia.